On a serious note, thank you very much for joining what is a resurgence of a fantastic initiative last year, which was IsoNation. And just a bit of a recap for people that weren't involved in the IsoNation collective last year. The brainchild of Nifty Communications, we collaborated to create a network of like-minded business leaders across the UK to help navigate what was a very, very changing landscape. And at the time, things were changing pretty much daily, and the level of uncertainty was really high. And it was just really great to get people together to share best practice, share how they've been affected by the pandemic, and then as a collaboration, really just to understand how we can collectively help each other to navigate that landscape. Now we're in lockdown 3. We just thought it was really pertinent that people are still in a bit of isolation. So we thought it was a perfect time to bring IsoNation back, and under the brainchild of a new initiative called Survive to Thrive from Nicola. Actually, it was Nicola, one of our contributors today, and both Nicola Roke and Andrew Lavoipierre were co-contributors to the IsoNation Leaders Insight shows last year. So it's great that we've all been able to come back. It's not so great that we're in lockdown again, but we are starting to see that uncertainty lift with the vaccination program well underway in the UK, and post-Brexit we're starting to see things starting to peter out, and we're moving forward. So we thought today we've got a 4-week and a 4-part series under the Survive to Thrive, but today is all about leadership through a pandemic. So as I mentioned briefly earlier, first of all, I'd like to thank and introduce my 2 co-panelists today. We've got Nicola Roke from Danton HR. How are you, Nicola? You well? Good, thank you. How are you? Very good, very good. Great to see you again. I say great to see you again. We see each other quite a bit, to be fair, on Zoom. So it's great, but it's always great to see you. Nicola runs a fantastic business called Danton HR. They're an outsourced HR specialist, and she offers a whole host of HR generalist advice for organisations across the SME landscape. And I know a number of organisations that work with her, and they all speak very highly of her. So thank you very much today, Nicola. And equally so, we've got Andrew Lavoipierre, again, someone I speak to quite frequently on Zoom. We've got a shared collective network. And Andrew is he's an award-winning action coach. He specialises essentially in growing organisations within the same SME landscape. And I know a number of his clients, current, that speak very highly of some of the great work that Andrew's able to do with those organisations. So I'm really, really pleased, and I'm very, very, very grateful for your time today. I'll be a co-contributor, and for those that don't know me, my name's Nick Baxter, and I run a consultancy. Essentially, I am an employee engagement and recruitment consultancy based in Worcestershire, and I'm going to be talking today through around recruiting great talent through a pandemic. So everybody can be talking about different things. Nicola's going to be talking about employer brand and employer value proposition, and Andy's going to be talking about leadership through a crisis. So in terms of, let's just talk a little bit about everyone's business before we go into this. We'll just briefly talk around what's been, since the last time we spoke, Nicola, tell me a little bit about how you guys have been supporting and assisting organisations through these various lockdowns over the last 12 months.
Yeah, so kind of initially we started off getting to grips with furlough and lockdown and kind of different working arrangements, and we were in that real kind of survival mode with our clients. We were helping them work through all of those challenges. We went through kind of October time, we seemed to feel a real peak in terms of reorganisations and restructures. So we were doing a lot around role design, organisational design. We went through some redundancy programmes and, you know, like I say, restructures with businesses. Interestingly, now we're still in that phase with quite a few of our clients, but we're talking quite a lot about what the new normal looks like. We're talking about engagement, we're talking about well-being, we're still talking restructures, but quite a bit, I guess, particularly because of the time of year. We're talking budgets and what businesses need over the next kind of 12 months to 2 years. We're starting to talk about strategy and planning again, which is kind of really, really important for businesses moving forward. So we did have this pocket of time where it felt like it was quite reactive. Now it feels like we're thinking with businesses a little bit more strategically again.
Okay, fantastic. And before I tell you a little bit, before I find out from you, Andy, I thought I'd just say, because obviously we kind of the stuff that you talk about mirrors from a recruitment perspective, very similar. The first thing that happened from a recruitment perspective was because there was a level of uncertainty around trading, then everybody just stopped everything. All the recruitment kind of just fell by the wayside. And then we started to realize how organizations were affected by COVID. Anyone that was predominantly like hospitality and leisure, and anyone that had footfall related products and services, they just stopped recruitment, and they were doing exactly what you were saying. They were furloughing, they were looking at how they were going to restructure the business around people and around cash. And then there were some organizations that actually were trading really well but had some issues with supply chain. So even though there was a demand for their products, there was an issue around supply chain, either them being able to manufacture or for them to be able to logistically to get their products and their services out to their end users. So they were affected, but they knew that there was only a short-term effect, because ultimately their product was still in demand or their services were still in demand. And then we had a whole host of people, particularly within agriculture, food, retail, and supply chain, actually logistics firms and sheds and warehouse and sheds, any organizations that were linked to that, they were just going crazy, and there was an amazing demand for their products. So it was really weird how organizations had changed, and it was really weird how we were able to support organizations. And because our businesses, we work within a number of verticals, it meant that where we had some elements that were kind of shut off, there was some areas which needed extra support, more support than they would normally have wanted. So Andy, tell us a little bit about how you've kind of navigated and how you've supported, like myself and Nicola, over the last 12 months, your client base.
Listen, I think like everybody, you know, it's when this first hit, I think, irrespective in my experience, there was just shock. Is what happens now? You know, what are we going to do? So, you know, from my perspective, it was all about looking at working with my clients. Number one is just looking at survival. All right. Once you know in business you can survive, it creates so much. It makes clarity so much easier. You know, so it really working around survival first, then creating clarity, and then planning. All right, as much as we can. To how we come out the back end of this, and the reality is this, and my learning from 2008, the financial crisis 2008, which I've sort of carried through into this crisis, is the businesses that came out the back end of 2008 the strongest were the businesses who had the strongest plans. You know, but the strongest plan can only come to fruition if you have clarity. So that's pretty much where I've worked with my clients over the last 12 months. And you know, there's still a lot of work. There's still a degree of uncertainty right now. But planning is key, and leadership, which we will come on to a little bit later, is obviously part of that.
Fantastic, thank you guys. And it's always really nice to set the tone on where we've come from and where we are now. And I think that was, and correct me if I'm wrong, Nicola, that was the idea behind your thoughts around creating this Survive to Thrive. We've now gone through the treading water area phase, and I think everyone just had enough. I think everyone was, instead of everyone waiting for this uncertain landscape to now become quite certain and now become quite clear, everyone was saying there's always going to be a certain degree of uncertainty. So instead of us dipping our toe in the water, we probably aren't going to be able to dive fully in, but we certainly want to immerse ourselves. And we certainly want to look like, as you said there, Andy, that we have a plan. And it might be our plan B and it might be our plan C, but we want to put some legs behind that plan. So today, it's all about leadership through crisis. We're going to make today really short, sharp, punchy. We're going to make it so you've got, Andy labeled it perfectly when he put his LinkedIn post, some really short, sharp, fantastic takeaways and some value to take away for the weekend. So who wants to go first? Because I'm good going first. Nicola, Andy, who wants to go first? Shall I just crack on?
Yeah, crack on.
All right, perfect. So what I wanted to do, I wanted to talk a little bit today about recruiting great talent through the pandemic. And I just wanted to briefly talk for 5 or 6 minutes. It's probably going to be 8 to 10 minutes, but no longer than that, around some of the things that I've seen. Now, it's a beautiful thing about recruitment, because recruitment, when you speak to a recruiter, and this is not a pitch for recruiters, you know, if a recruiter isn't adding value to a piece of recruitment and you can think you can do it directly, then I implore you to do that. And at certain levels and within certain specialisms, there's an area and there's a time for using a recruiter. But recruiters speak to lots and lots of candidates, and they speak to lots and lots of clients. So there is one thing that a recruiter has, and that's a fantastic network, and also a fantastic ability to get that litmus paper to find out what's going on in the marketplace. And one of the issues I've got currently with employers is they think it's a buyer's market, and this is a real fallacy. Like, there's lots of candidates in the marketplace, but there's great candidates are doing one of two things. They've probably unfortunately found themselves redundant, but very rarely that is. Most great candidates are still doing a great job for an organization that values them and is rewarding them properly. So what I want people to do is lose this perception that it's a buyer's market. There's loads of candidates and they will be jumping at your jobs. There are lots of candidates in the market, but in terms of great candidates, that top 5, 10, 15% will always be that top 5, 10, 15%. And those guys will normally have a network. So if you want those guys, you have to access that network. And without plugging recruiters, the great thing about recruiters is they have that network, so they're able to find that candidate. A great candidate is a passive candidate. A great candidate is doing a fantastic job in a business and being rewarded well. In order for them to think that their future lies elsewhere, they need to be attracted, and they need to have their head turned, and they need to be engaged with. And an engagement on a Indeed job advert isn't the same as an engagement from a recruiter or someone in their network that knows your business and knows that candidate and think there's a great marriage. So I really want people to move away from that mindset. And equally so, I heard a story through someone in my recruiter network about a fantastic candidate and a sub-executive candidate that a client had engaged with. And they thought because there were lots of candidates out there, they could offer that candidate less than what they were worth. And the candidate, unbeknown to the client, was involved in 2 processes. And the other process saw the value in the candidate and offered them exactly what they were worth in the marketplace. The client that offered their first offer, then went back to the candidate with a revised offer. And it was just so silly. It was such a terrible mindset, and actually screams volumes about the values of that business. If you find a great candidate that's engaged in your business or in your brand, pay them exactly what they're worth and make it worth their while. So that's the first one. It's not a buyer's market by any stretch of imagination. It might be at a lower level, at a lower skilled level of requirement. It certainly may well be. But if you're still looking to attract top talent still has a place to attract them in the right way. Second thing is, in terms of attracting great candidates, you need to connect with those candidates, and Nicola will talk about it, so I won't steal her thunder too much. One of the biggest bugbears with candidates at the moment is not having salary on job adverts. Now, there is a reason why sometimes clients don't put that on there. They may be worried about the current salary bandings within the organisation, and they may generally not know. But the first thing I'd implore anyone that's recruiting is to understand exactly what the worth is of a candidate, and make sure you put it on a job description. It might not be the most important thing, and Nicola no doubt will talk about the most important key driving factor. But remember, the candidates you want, they're going to need to get their head turned, and if they think the job description looks all right or very good, they're not going to be bought in, because there's a lot of flex between salaries. Let it be known, let that candidate see exactly what you put on that role, and if there's any movement, you can at least put a salary and you can say there's the right movement for a candidate, or there's an ability to flex. But you definitely need to put that on there. And also, from a connecting with a candidate's perspective, and again, not steal any of Nicola's thunder, you need to connect, you need to let them know a little bit more about beyond salary. Candidates are motivated very differently. In the last 10 years, candidates have been motivated differently. And one of the motivations will be around flexible working. You know, that whole landscape's changing. Now, organizations have seen they can be as productive, or can be very productive and as efficient with a workforce that works remotely. So make sure that you are putting your benefits down. It might be pension, it might be salary, it might be a cycle to work scheme. It's going to be around flexible working. Make sure you put that there. And the last one, and again, Nicola will talk a little bit more about that, I'm sure, is the values. Make sure that you've got your values. Make sure that you've got some representation of your values or your culture that comes through when you're advertising roles or when you're reaching out to candidates. Again, you can still get that down in an advert if you're directly recruiting, if you're recruiting directly without an agency. And certainly from an agency perspective, make sure you're engaging with agencies that know your business, know your brand, and know your values, know that the accepted behaviors in your business, and they can speak to the candidate and they can marry the motivations of the candidate with yours. So that's my second one. Make sure you're connecting with candidates, because that's the only way you're going to get them involved in the recruitment process. There's a genuine connection and a genuine marrying of values. And then the third one is this isn't a ploy by clients. What we're finding is lots of candidates are protracting the process, and they're dragging the process out, and they're not dragging it out for any other reason apart from they probably didn't have time scales set out when they went to recruit. So I implore you, when you're engaging, when you're looking at speaking to candidates, make sure there's a time scale there. Make sure you're not dragging that time scale along beyond 2 weeks. For executive piece of recruitment, it may be 3 or 4 weeks, but what I can tell you is that, as is ever the case, great candidates are, once they've decided they're willing to move, they will be engaged in other processes. So make sure that you've got a defined time scale to go through this, and that will involve, and I know it's quite difficult remotely, to make sure all the key decision makers are involved in that process. So whether it's a line manager, whether it's another line manager you've got access to, another member of the senior management team, whether you want to engage some of the people that will be working for this individual, to make sure you've got like a 360 approach to the interviews. That's fantastic. It's a fantastic way of engaging candidates, but make sure that you've got that set up, because there's nothing more frustrating than delivering a fantastic shortlist and then losing a candidate because a client hasn't been able to get the process done smoothly. And the last one in terms of recruiting the right talent is the onboarding process. Nicola, are you going to talk a little bit about the onboarding process? Can I touch upon that?
A bit, but not massively.
Okay, so let me just touch upon it. Onboarding is the most frustrating part for both candidates and for recruiters and for some HR professionals, because what happens is you go through this really intense, interactive, communicative process of engaging with a candidate, interviewing a candidate again, getting a candidate to do a presentation, getting the candidate to walk around the offices or the building to get a feel for the business. And then as soon as you've made that offer, lots of organizations and line managers switch off. They think, I've got my man, I've got my lady, I've got this person, that's it. And actually, the onboarding process is the most important time to make sure that you're engaging and have the candidate engaged, because there's nothing worse than not having the right contract, the contract going out late, getting the offer letter going out late, getting, when people turn up on site for the first day, not getting the IT sorted. And all of these early touch points are the foundation for the candidate to build a relationship with the client. Anything that potentially puts any holes in that early engagement, it's a proven, so it's a statistically proven to be the reason why candidates don't work out in the first, that first couple of months. There's a bit of trepidation from both sides. We need to really make sure that onboarding process is safe, is secure, is documented, and works out, or else you're literally you're starting on the back foot. So all of the hard work you've done before, that same level of attention and input needs to happen through the onboarding process. So the 4 points, how many minutes was that? Was that within 7 or 8 minutes?
Who knows?
Yeah, so the 4 points: 1, it's not a buyer's market out there. So make sure that you are still attracting those people in the right way. 2, make sure you're connecting with those candidates. So make sure any form of communication is embodying not just the role, not just the responsibilities, but the values of your business, your behaviors, and your culture, so they can really get that connection. That will be the difference between a candidate leaving that job description or not engaging with an agency and actually putting themselves in that process, which is exactly what you want them to do. 3rd one is timescales. Do not elongate your timescales. Make sure you've got a defined timetable around the recruitment process, that you either communicate with your agency or you communicate with the candidate at that first point of contact. And then the 4th one is make sure you have effective onboarding. And all of those points really are elevating the candidate experience. That candidate experience is so important in attracting and retaining and accessing fantastic candidates through the pandemic. So I'm hoping that there's some really cool takeaways that you can take from those points. And I'm more than happy to field any questions, or indeed if anybody wants to get in touch with me on LinkedIn or on email that thinks actually, Nick, I could do with elaborating on that, happy to do so. So that's my first point. That's my first bit around attracting and recruiting fantastic talent through a pandemic. I'm gonna go to you now, Andy, actually, and we're going to talk a little bit about leadership through a crisis.
Cool. Yeah, listen, that was really interesting, Bacco. Thanks for that. So in terms of, I'm probably only going to be sort of 5 minutes, because I'm going to do this in a sort of series of questions, just to get people that are running their own businesses and people in leadership positions thinking about leadership and how they are leading, have been leading, and how they plan to lead. So I guess to start with, the first question I tend to ask when I'm discussing specifically leadership with my clients and is, are you leading the role or the individual? Now that may sound like a strange question, but my experience is a lot of leaders are when they are managing stroke leading, they tend to lead the role. And the question comes down to this, and is this: do you really understand the drivers of each individual you lead? Right? And there's a way of getting to that, way of understanding that. And I guess next question, follow-on question will be: does your organization utilize any profiling tools? I know Nicola uses DISC with her clients. I'm also DISC certified. I use DISC as a profiling tool, and it's a way of truly understanding from a leader's perspective how you're going to get the best out of your people. And if you don't understand how to communicate with each individual, are you truly able to get the best out of it? And there, if you aren't, in my experience, you will then fall back into leading the role rather than the individual. That's question number one. Question number two is quite difficult. Is how often do you self-audit your leadership? And self-auditing, some people will call it reflection. I actually split self-auditing and reflection out from each other. How often do you self-audit? Self-auditing is critical for any leader, insofar as it says to yourself, and listen, you only have to prove anything to yourself. It says to yourself that I'm happy to be self-critical, and in many cases, not all, it gets rid of ego. One of the biggest challenges in leadership roles is ego. I've arrived. I say you do. But that's not leadership. That's just telling people what to do. Question number three: have you or do you encourage your business to audit your leadership? How open are you to your business being critical of you? Now, I'll just give you a short story in terms of, and this is my style, and listen, I appreciate that most of you don't know me who are watching this, but my style is when I did work in the corporate world, we had, as part of our broader values as a business, and we had 3,000 employees around the world, was anybody could walk into my office and call me an idiot. Now that may sound strange, but there was one caveat to that. and that is this: walk into my office, call me an idiot, and tell me why. And I was happy for that. I was happy for that culture to permeate throughout the organization. Now, I'm not suggesting everybody should follow. I live my life pretty black and white. So I responded well, and I do respond well to the direct approach. But I do know that across the business, it was very well received, and it was well received insofar as it said to the business that I was completely transparent from a leader's perspective. Question 5: what has truly changed in your business from a leadership perspective since the 23rd of March 2020? And the buzzword over the last 12 months or 11 months has been pivot. How has your business pivoted? What do we need to do to pivot? My question to leaders is this: how about you? How have you pivoted? How's your leadership style pivoted to suit the current situation? If it hasn't pivoted, if it hasn't changed, I would suggest you may want to have a good look at what has happened over the last 11 months. Because there's no doubt in my mind, if your leadership style has not changed, if you haven't pivoted, all right. And there's one question that I do also ask is this, and it's does your workforce need more or less structure right now? I don't know. Only you can answer that question. And then you're going to need, has your personal leadership model adapted? How have you adapted your personal leadership model? There's 4 key elements, in my opinion. Now, there's plenty of leadership models out there that you potentially need to look at. 1 is your priorities. 2 is your roles. 3 is your time. And 4 is your energy within your operating model. Now, if anybody wants to chat to me about this, I mean, this is a couple of hours in terms of discussing this model. So, please feel to reach out to me on LinkedIn or email. I'm always happy to chat to you about this. And then, final question from me for you: how often do you truly practice self-reflection? In my opinion, if you're not practicing self-reflection on a daily basis, you're not doing it enough.
I agree.
And the facts are quite simple. That, the more we prepare to hold ourselves to account, the more likely and willing we are going to be to make the necessary changes. And changes, learning, only if we change and only if we learn can we truly achieve our full potential as leaders. So there's a series of questions in there. I hope that at least one of them resonates with you guys. Hopefully a couple, 2 or 3 would. But that's my job as a coach. My job as a coach is to really put the questions out there to my clients. And get people to reflect on them. So that's all good, and that's me done.
Andy, thank you. Listen, when we talked about what we're going to speak about today, each one of these can be a 2-hour conversation. So I know how much content you have. I know how much content's in your head. So to limit yourself to like 5 or 6 minutes, I know that you could elaborate on each one of those for half an hour. Just a couple of takeaways from me around the DISC, and like Nicola, you're an accredited DISC professional. I just think it's imperative that I use DISC when I'm recruiting. I use DISC once I've recruited. I use DISC for my new recruits to understand their profile if we don't understand the profiles, we're not going to understand how to lead and manage these individuals. And as you know, with DISC, you've got a profile, and a default profile. You've got a profile that when you're stressed or when you're under duress, where your characteristics kick in. You have to understand what pinch points people have. And then, without elaborating too much on it, you talked a little bit about, as your management style changed, given your DISC, given you understand, whether it's DISC or any profiling tool, given the fact you understand your employees, remote working has been very difficult from a communication perspective, from an engagement perspective. There's been a whole host of mental health issues with staff that are working remotely that just feel isolated or haven't got any level of contact and miss the energy from the working environment. If you haven't changed your leadership style, you're no longer engaging with your guys, and you're no longer getting the best from your guys, and you're no longer supporting these guys, because you've got a duty of care as a leader, not only to get the most productivity out of your guys, but also to look after them and provide a working environment that's safe for them. So I'm a massive fan of that, and again, we can talk about that forever. The last one really, and the big bit around encouraging people to your senior management team, regardless of who they are, to imploring people to not challenge your style, but just, I've got a very similar mindset, and culturally in my business, it's because I'm the owner of the business doesn't mean I know everything and everything I say is correct a lot of the time, because that's why strategically how you lead the business. But people know at any one time they can knock on the door, or they can openly challenge anything I'm saying, and as long as there's a mindset behind it, as long as it's delivered in a proper and professional way, I implore that. Now, this is why when you said the last bit, how often do you self-reflect? It's so lonely as a business owner. It's so lonely. I've got a business coach. I'm come from an elite sports background, so I'm lost without having a coach or a mentor anywhere close to me. And if this pandemic isn't a reason for people to look and say, who's my mentor, who's my coach, who am I reaching to? Because unless you're accountable to an investor or the bank, as a leader, business owner, you're not accountable to anyone really. And it's a lonely place to make strategic decisions without having someone to bounce off. And it's also a lonely place without someone to actually tell you that to give you some creative feedback. Criticism isn't a word I use, and I'm sure it's not a word that most of the people in my network use. But feedback, and whether it's critical or creative feedback is what we all need, because that's the only reason that we become a better version of ourselves. So again, don't want to elaborate on it, but I just wanted to pull out a couple of points from what you were saying, which make it really pertinent. I mean, and we'll look in the fullness of time through IsoNation or through Survive and Thrive to elaborate on those points. But again, if anybody would like to reach out to Andy on LinkedIn or indeed on email, then feel free to do so. And last but certainly by no means least, Nicola, I'd like you to tell us a little bit more about how organizations can thrive and how leadership through a crisis can be achieved through employer brand and employer value proposition. So fire away.
Cool. Okay, so I guess from an employer brand perspective, it's kind of there whether you like it or not. Every business that employs people has an employer brand, and I guess from a leadership perspective, you can either do something to influence your employer brand, or you can passively kind of allow that to happen over time. Employer brand is something which is quite intangible. It's something that's created over time. I guess the purpose of having a really strong employer brand is to enable your business to kind of recruit, attract, retain, engage the right people. So whether you are going through a recruitment process, whether you've got a very long-serving member of the team, employer brand is absolutely critical to everything that, as an employer, to everything that you do. It has to be connected to your values. It's that golden thread through every single element of kind of people management practice. So Nick, you talked about the importance of getting it right through recruitment, and absolutely through induction. What does that say about our employer brand? But not only through kind of attracting and bringing in the right people. What does a business's employer brand say? What does it do? How does it feel for people within the business through appraisal, through performance management, through reward, through internal communication, through, we've talked about DISC and extended DISC and the various different tools that we can use to really get the best out of our people, get the best out of our leaders, our managers, our team members. How do we, from a brand perspective, how do we kind of promote really, really strong internal communication? How are we promoting and developing really effective management behaviours? So as we attract people, as we retain people, and as we kind of exit people through the business as well, our employer brand is absolutely critical. So as I said at the start, we can either have some kind of control and influence over it and be very conscious about what we want our employer brand to say, to do, what kind of messaging, both internally and externally, we want to be saying about our business. And then also just kind of thinking alongside that about our employer value proposition. Again, it's always a really, really good time to think about what our employer value proposition is, what it says about our business, and how do we, through that value proposition, how do we attract and retain the best possible people for our business? So maybe a few years ago, that value proposition was very financially driven. So in years gone by, base salary, bonus, and kind of job title, or kind of where you fit within the hierarchy, that may have been, from a value proposition, the most important thing. I think as time's gone by, people are expecting more out of their employers. They're expecting more out of the companies that they invest their time in. And so from a value proposition perspective, if we break it down into kind of 4 key areas really around where leaders can influence, can shape, can improve, and can make a value proposition more attractive to people, and again, we're talking about attracting and retaining people, there are so many different ways that employers can do more to make things more attractive, more appealing, to get the best out of people. Gartner did some research quite recently, and they kind of identified some key metrics around the value and the benefit of having a strong employer value proposition, having a strong employer brand. So with engaged teams, 21% greater productivity, 17% higher, 21% greater profitability, 17% higher productivity, 10% higher customer ratings than disengaged teams. Those metrics are absolutely critical if we're thinking about going from a kind of, from a survival position through to businesses thriving and really moving forward. Get the best out of the assets that you've got, get the best out of your people. So thinking about EVP, employer value proposition, breaking it down into 4 areas, thinking about the company. What is so great about the company? Thinking about culture fit, thinking about having really amazing and inspiring vision, mission, and values around the business. Thinking about how we get the best out of our high-performing teams. Thinking about CSR and social responsibilities. If you're looking to attract and retain the best people, whether you realise it or not, people are looking for these things. People, they have them on the radar. They might not consciously realise, but subconsciously, these things are important to people. The work that people do, again, it's not just about basic salary. It's got to be exciting. It's got to be challenging. It's got to be, most people are looking for continuous learning. So they might stay in a role at the moment a little bit longer than ideal for them. But most people don't want to stagnate in their role. They want to have really exciting, challenging work to do. In terms of continuous learning, you don't have to go into a different role to do something really interesting. People can take responsibility for their own development. Businesses might not have massive training budgets at the moment, but actually there's a lot that people can do, and businesses can encourage and support a lot of self-learning that's available at fairly low cost at the moment. It's about kind of those mobility and growth opportunities that businesses can offer to people as well. And flexibility and autonomy. There's so much that businesses can do. Again, from an EVP perspective, I could talk for hours about this, so I'll try and slim it down. But from an EVP perspective, people looking at businesses, people looking at a brand of a business and making assumptions about businesses, they're really interested in who they're going to be working with. So they'll be interested in leadership styles, in who are the leaders within the business, and what can leaders do to really show their organisation, not just in their best light, but in their true light as well. So there's got to be some integrity about employer brands and about that value proposition. It's got to be that golden thread. There's no point presenting yourself externally as actually something that you're not. You won't attract the right people into your business. But people, you know, people, they say people leave people, they don't leave a business. You know, this is about what can we as business owners, as business leaders, do to really encourage, to attract and retain the best possible people. How can we look after our people? And then kind of the fourth element, and I've kind of deliberately made it the fourth element, is around pay and benefits. And yes, base salary, of course, it's really important. Bonuses are really important. But actually, that whole benefits package has changed over time. So, like you said earlier, Nick, about what we, you know, how we advertise jobs, how we make them appealing to people, what information we share. Actually, people are interested in pensions. They are interested in the additional benefits that businesses can offer. They are interested in EAPs, for example. They are interested in getting and achieving a work-life balance. They are interested in flexible working. And all of those elements wrap up to a really strong, attractive EVP from a business perspective, back to attracting and retaining the best people for the business. Just to kind of finish, and like I said, I could talk for hours about this. I think integrity is really, really important in your employer brand and the EVP. There's no point developing something that isn't true to your own business, that isn't true to your own culture, because you won't then, you might attract the, you know, you might attract a type of person, but retention is hugely important. So yeah, last thing from me is all about integrity.
I love it. I love it. And again, that each one of those strands could be another could be a half an hour. Each one of those 4 strands could be half an hour. The thing that I wanted to touch upon was, and let's see which order I do it in, when you talked about that employee engagement piece, because it's such a strong link between employee engagement and the employer brand, because the employer brand is internal and is external. It's internal because that's the engagement piece. It's external because you're screaming from the rooftops about this is what we do here. You want to join this fantastic team. You talked around the profitability and the productivity that comes from engaged workforces, and I know those stats really well because obviously I run an employee engagement element of Baxter Williams. There's only average is 13% of employees. This is before the pandemic. 13% of employees are engaged. So imagine how hard it is to engage the 13% that were engaged remotely, when you're not communicating well, when your leadership style changes because the business is under pressure and they put more pressure onto the business. Imagine how that falls down. So before we even go to the piece around building the employer brand, organizations really need to do that audit. You talked about an audit. They need to do like a 360 feedback, and we talked about it before when the self-reflection piece and that Andy was talking about. Organizers need to do that. So before we even start the employer brand, they need to say, where are we right now? Let's do a full audit. And I know you can do that for organizations to find out where they are, because having recruited for a number of organizations that say these are our values, the first thing I ask now when someone talks to me about mission, someone talks to me about values, is to say, all right, so those values, what does it mean? When you talk about integrity and when you talk about professionalism, you talk about fun, they're just words. Let's make those words, let's make them tangible so they mean something. So I always ask people, all right, what are the accepted behaviors? What's that? If that's a value, what's the behavior that underpins that in the business, so that you've got some tangibility? And I think to finish as well, on what you finished, the integrity is so important. Netflix did it, and on the back of what Netflix did, Netflix created like a matrix, didn't they, of the behaviors and the values, so they were lined up and they were so authentic. They weren't just some strap line they were using to attract people or to put into the ether or to raise their profile as an employer of choice. It was actually because it was really authentic, and it was stuff that the values that he lived and they breathed daily. So again, we could talk about it forever, but really interesting point. And I think for everyone, whether it's how to recruit through a pandemic, whether it's leadership through crisis, whether it's a strong employer brand and value proposition, I think most organizations need to have a little look in the mirror and just say, where are we now? And it's not a look to criticize, it's a look to say, where are we now? Where do you want to get to? And where you want to get to in 2 years around your employer brand and around your leadership and around recruiting the best talent isn't where you are now. So don't even think, let's just see, let's look at what we can do now, what's achievable. And to go back to what you said, Andy, what's the plan to look at all 3 of those strands to start moving? Because half the battle isn't recognizing where you're at, it's engaging a plan to get to where you need to get to. So what I wanted to do, I haven't got any questions. Linda said hi Linda. I haven't got any questions. If anyone's got any questions, feel free to put them through, and I'll see if anybody is posting anything. But as I said before, we're easily contacted on LinkedIn. You can get through to me on my website or online. Feel free to reach out to us. What I wanted to do was to thank Nicola Roke of Danton HR, and thank Andy Lavoipierre from ActionCOACH. I wanted to thank you for your time. Is there anything you guys want to say to sign off before we say goodbye to everyone? I don't think we've got any questions, but what we normally do with the very first of the webinars is we get loads of post feedback online, and then when people know it's happening weekly, and it'll be happening every Friday, then we'll start getting a bit more interaction. But we've had quite a few attendees today on the webinar, and I'm really pleased. But to sign off, is anything from you, Nicola?
No, just back to integrity, back to authenticity, and yeah, really happy to have a chat with anybody about this.
I know you've got a HR health check audit that you offer to your clients, so as a bit of a taste to kind of see what's going on. You've got some phenomenal content. You've got lots of really accessible free content for people that don't know much about Danton HR on the website, which is fantastic. And it's not your giveaways that people normally give, which hasn't got any value. There's some genuine value in some of those offerings. So thank you very much for today. And then before we sign off, Andy, have you got anything to say to sign off, or is there any takeaways that people can get from you?
No, listen, it's the takeaways really are the questions. If you're able to go through the list, I think there were 6 questions that I posed there, and you can answer those questions, honestly. You're going to get some value out of it. Because the reality is we all should be anyway in a constant state of learning. If we want to get better, if we want to become better leaders, if we want to get better at business, if we want to get better at recruitment, if we want to get better at running businesses, we just have to continuously learn.
I love that. And is there anything that, because I know that historically, if anyone was interested in accessing ActionCOACH, because you've got a whole host of programs that you run, from the peer groups all the way through to one-to-one, more detailed and intimate sessions. Is there anything anyone can reach out to you and just literally get a bit of advice, or just say, listen, I'd like to see what it looks like?
Yeah, I'm happy to always discuss, have a chat and see where people are. And I say this to everybody. As a coach, I have a moral obligation to help everybody. Always happy to anybody to lean on me. It's not, the reality is I don't have all the answers. You
got most of them.
But feel free to reach out, and hey, listen, if you like direct, I'm your man.
I think that's probably the best caveat, but nonetheless, Andy is a wealth of experience, and he's got global experience, just like Nicola has in big PLCs, and he brings a really fantastic style like Nicola. If you want to speak to any of us guys, you know where we are, but I'd just like to say a massive thank you to everybody that attended, a massive thank you to my co-contributors and guests today. We look forward to next week. We're going to put some tasters out like we did this week around the session for next week's Survive to Thrive, and I wish everyone a fantastic and safe weekend. Thank you very much, guys.